Okay, they whipped that together. Terry Quilico is the author, and the other two actors you know very well did a good job. Another round of applause. Which reminds me that if you go through Shakespeare, there are an awful lot of references to Italians, Italy, Italian individuals, and you'd almost think of that Shakespeare visited Italy, but I don't think so. I've never heard that he did, but I don't know his travel itineraries. Anyhow, I guess Shakespeare did recognize that Italy had everything that the British didn't, so. So he needed to put it into place. Anyhow, I'm not sure who in next. Catherine Occhipinti is our next guest. She is not only a medical doctor, but an advocate of Italian language and of a kind of revolutionary way of approaching the Italian language. And I'm glad to have her back here again, Katherine Occhipinti.
Thank you. Anna? Anna, did you get the internet up for me? I don't know how to get your...
As you learned from Hamlet, the digital revolution is kind of hard to keep up with.
Yeah, that's a hard act to follow. So anyway, what I noticed from the first half was that the speakers here seem to have one thing in common, and that is that their upbringing as Italians in this country had a lot to do with their development as writers. And that is the same thing for me. I'm third generation, and in my case, you know, we had the traditions with the food, we had the Sunday dinner, we went to church. I grew up in a neighborhood that was Italian, Irish, Jewish, some German, in New York. And so we all had our ethnic groups and we all had our traditions. But what I found was that the one thing that was missing from my life was the language. And I firmly believe that really to know a culture, you do need to learn their language. You do need to know how they think and how they feel about things. And that is all really expressed through their language, as much as, you know, through the food and the other traditions. So, so I grew up, and in this household, I took a little bit of Italian in high school, took a little bit of Italian in college, and then, as Dominic mentioned, I went off to medical school and really had to focus on that. And then eventually, I ended up in Peoria for a job, and I started raising my family, and I wanted them to know really what it is to be Italian, and I went back to the idea of language and learning the language. And I have no less than, I would say, 20 textbooks trying to teach myself Italian, and so, you know, I had some schooling. And I found when I went to Italy, I didn't know simple things like, you know, how to ask to take a taxi, how to make reservations at the hotel. And the reason is that, you know, the schools really don't focus on these things. And then when I came back, a friend of mine in Peoria wanted to start a class for the Italian American Society there. And so we did, because now the focus is, you know, before the focus was language was really not important, we want to be American. But now the focus is it's so important to know where you come from. It's so important to know your relatives and to know your town and to know if that is a part of who you are. So it was really wonderful for me because I brought back my interest in language. So I kind of did things in a unique way. I ended up, I was looking for things on the internet and didn't really quite find everything I wanted. So I wrote my own material. I thought, oh, how hard could it be, right? So, like any writer, I was an English major in college too. So, of course, 18 chapters, and 4.5 years later, I had a textbook. And every time we would do a chapter, we would also go over it. You know, in our, it was an informal meetup group. You know, you could call it a class. It was really very informal. We had food. It was Italian. I would go over it and I would see how it went over and revise it. So it was kind of a unique way to write a book. So I didn't write it as, oh, here I'm a scholar, I'm fluent in Italian, this is what people need to know. I kind of went to people and said, you know, what do you need to know? And did it that way. And then I realized no one's going to want to buy a 450-page textbook. So I took sections out and I made smaller reference books, which I like because I'm a very visual learner, so I made some really nice clear tables so people can find the tables. And of course I have explanations. And I tried to get everything on one page. Because another thing I didn't like about textbooks, especially language, was they try to cram it all in. So you've got some of the information here, and then it ends here, and then they start a new topic there. So that's what I did, and I self-published. And I'm happy I did, except although I would say a publisher would have told me this is not a good cover because my title is very small and it doesn't look good on the thumbnails when you put it up on Amazon. If you look at every other Italian book, it says Italian in big block letters. But anyway, I'm hoping people will recognize the picture and recognize my little series from there. Okay, so then I did all that, and then I decided, from being in some language groups here, people were saying, okay, well, you know this stuff, but can you talk about yourself? And you know, honestly, I really couldn't talk about myself very well. So I said, you know what, this is important too. We're all adults, we need to be able to talk about what we're doing. And so, as I'm continuing to learn Italian, I have these blogs. So again, the same idea. As I'm learning, I put up what I'm learning. And so I just wanted to show you my blogs a little bit. So this has been a very popular blog, and I'm continuing with this all year. Everyday phrases. So I noticed when I started to learn Italian, and you know what I would tell people too is you have to interact with the language, watch a movie, listen to music, play the same segment of the movie over and over. You know, after you've enjoyed it, just keep watching it. Try and, even if you just pick out a few words, that's, you know, you'll remember that movie, oh, this is where I learned that word. But then I realized to become fluent, we can't be thinking, okay, let's put one word here and one word there, and you know, you have to speak, right? We all speak fluently, we speak pretty quickly. I mean, I can conjugate any verb you want in my head, okay? I know the airy verbs, the airy verbs, well, but when I try to speak, those verbs just have to come out. I can't sit and think about it. So what I realized was is when we learn languages, we start remembering phrases. So, mi ha detto, someone said to me, he said to me, mi ha detto. We use it a lot. So I'm putting out phrases that I have found occur over and over, so high frequency phrases on this blog. So this is a blog for people who want to learn simple Italian, and it's called Conversational Italian. And I'm also putting out phrases. I'm also putting up cultural things about holidays in Italy, Festa della Donna. And I've learned quite a bit from this blog too, because I've researched it online for what I write. And these are very short blogs. Food, if anyone wants to know how I cook, there you go. Proverbs, I try to put up every Friday. But these blogs are very short, so if we go into one, you can view it. Because another thing I know is, you know, So this is how it. So these are very simple. The Italian is in blue. It's another thing is everything is color coded. So I like that. And just this is how to use a very bisogno di, another important phrase. I need whatever you need. And then just a few example phrases. And another thing I do with this blog is I have a Facebook group called Conversational Italian, and I'll put up O bisogno di, and I'll ask people, how do you use that? Can you come up with some sentences for that? And then I'll use those sentences in the blog. So I make learning the language interactive that way, but also it's important to know how the words are used. And so people who use this make up a sentence, and I'll think, okay, this is probably not really Italian, but I don't want to correct them, so I'll say, any Italians in the Facebook group, is this how we would really use this word? And they'll come back and say, no, we won't really use it this way. Instead, we would say, something else. Again, making it interactive for people. And then, for people who really know Italian, what I'm trying to do now. So basically, on that blog, Conversational Italian is really the things that I already know, high-frequency phrases that I've come up with. But this blog is on my website, learntravelitallian.com, where again we have recipes and cultural notes about Italy. But if you go up here to our blog, and this is more to sell my books. There we go. I have longer blogs, and these blogs are basically what I'm learning now. So Speak Italian, all about me. So when my friend said, you're really not very good at talking about yourself in Italian, I thought, well, I'm going to learn how to talk about myself in Italian. And so maybe everyone else can learn from this. And so here is basically what I need to know to talk about myself. And then I put in the middle part of the blog what verbs you need to know. It's actually very complicated to talk about yourself, right? You need to know your present tense, but how about your family? Well, that can be in the past tense, where your family is from, past tense. So then I put the verbs that we need to know, the conjugations, and then in the end, I put a fill in the blank. So people can print it off and write their own history of what they need to know. And one thing I'm focusing on now is the subjunctive mode, and I've been told, it's a good excuse not to learn it. Well, Italians really don't use the subjunctive mode anymore, but actually it's very important. And, now that we're emailing, just to say to someone, I hope you're feeling well.
You do, yes.
You do, right? Yeah, it's not true. It's very important. But again, for an adult to learn Italian, it's important in certain situations. So I try and put out the situations that might come up, like I have the emails where the subjunctive would come up, if you're wishing someone well and how they're doing. So this is kind of what I've been doing lately, and I hope people, if they're interested, they can come to my blog. All this is free. If they really are interested, my textbook, I think covers all of the basics. You have a good working knowledge of beginning Italian. And thank you, Dominic, for allowing me to come and present everything I've been doing. And I really enjoyed it. I hope everyone will take a look, and maybe you'll enjoy it too. Sure. So the web address is learntravelitallian.com. And from that you can get to my blogs, and you can get to pretty much everything from that. You can get to my Facebook page. I have the icon there. And on Facebook, the group is just called Conversational Italian with an exclamation point. We have 414 members. It's really fun. And sometimes I wonder, are people really reading it? And then I slip up and I make a mistake in voice, and it's right there. I say thank you for, keeping me straight. And if I ask a question, do any Italians in the group? Because we have Italians from Italy in the group. Is this right or is this wrong? They'll be right there. So I have to say I've been really impressed. And it's a really nice group. And then the blog that goes with that one is just the same thing, conversationalitalian.wordpress.com. This is a WordPress blog. Okay.
My hand is off to you, Kathy.
Thanks.
Getting into competition with the publishers of Italian language books who change the edition every couple of years just so that you have to pay ungodly amounts to buy the new book. And engaging with Italian speakers. I think most of the Italian teachers were trained by Mussolini. And to consider a language as an authoritarian tool. So my hat is off to you for trying to break down the barrier and learn it in a practical way, which I still haven't done after 30-some trips to Italy. Adesso abbiamo un altro intervento da Roxanne Pilat. Roxanne, what's your maiden name?
Cristofano.
Oh, that's right, Cristofano. Roxanne is a PhD from the University of Illinois, Chicago English Department, and she is working on a biography of your father. It's a memoir biography of her father, and hopefully you'll make it into a play. She's working with you. Tell her.
Okay. You tell them. Hi, everyone. I'm really, I feel very privileged and happy to be part of the program today, and I recognize many of your faces from our work together before. Before I begin my own work, I want to point out that what I'm doing today is I'm going to do a few little short excerpts from different places in what is a memoir of sorts. I'm borrowing a different genre title for it, which I'll explain in a minute. But I'm going to give you a few little kind of teasing. The French have a really good word for it. Perhaps you can tell me if Italian. I'm asking why I learned French and not Italian in high school. But they have a word for something that they bring out before a dinner, little tastes of what's to come. And it's called amuse-bouche, so an amusement for the mouth. I don't know if we have, except for enoteca, right, small bites or something. I don't know if we have an Italian equivalent, but I'm going to give you this sort of, I hope, a tantalizing or at least maybe something that might pique your interest and join us. I've been asked by dear lifelong friends and colleagues, and I'm going to ask them just to stand up for a minute so you can connect with them because it may be important to your life and writing. Kathy Zacher-Schweitzer, and Maura Junius. And to show you what good friends they are, they came along today to meet many of you. They are part of a group that's starting a new nonprofit Italian-American Theater of Chicago. And so they are, we're having a kickoff, and I've been very honored to be asked to develop a dramatic presentation out of some of the work from my father's stories, which I will talk about in a minute, as a way to kick off the first year of the program, in which they will have a contest for original scripts based on Italian-American stories and themes. So all of you are hereby invited to be the first group to be formally invited to take a form for this and to consider your own work in this, adapting your own work for this contest, and to certainly join us, even if you're not so inclined, on August 25th at Hull House downtown on the University of Illinois campus, where the adaptation of some of my father's stories will be taking place in a dramatic presentation. So I've been interested today to hear so many of the stories. Some of you I've met in the past and some of you are new to me. And one of the things that came across to me is the number of connections we share and how we honor that and privilege that in our Italian culture. I'm sure other cultures would claim that as well, but I don't know. I think I'm willing to admit that bias, that I think we're especially good at developing and hanging on to our connections. I see people in the room here that I have connections with. Dominic certainly has introduced me to the whole world of Casa Italia, to the Italian American Historical Association, which is a marvelous meeting place for people with all sorts of, from creative writing to deeply historical scholarly interests. Billy, I met you through Narrative 4, which is a, well, not a startup anymore, but is a marvelous storytelling initiative that has now grown globally. We worked on it a few years ago in Chicago, which emphasizes the importance of sharing stories to build, and especially among people who might not normally meet each other. So from different countries, from different walks of life, from different political and religious beliefs, by sharing our individual stories, we can promote empathy and we can promote connections and identify in each other ourselves. Christian Picciolini, who was here earlier and spoke so powerfully, I'm working on an anthology with a team of editors from UIC of general readership and young adult stories on growing up Chicago is what it's going to be called. And Christian is one of our authors that we've selected, and we're adapting one of his, or he's adapting one of his chapters to be used in our book. So I'm a little overwhelmed with the connections that exist when in fact I started coming back to this world, or entering this world just a few short years ago when I, in midlife, did a kind of career and life change and decided to pursue my graduate degrees in midlife, now a little bit more than midlife. But I remember that my grandparents always taught me, and they said it in dialectal Italian, which is about the only Italian I really can claim to sort of understand. They said, when you stop working, you die. So with that axiom in front of me, I've never felt that I should stop working. My grandfather worked for the city of Chicago until my parents moved out to the suburbs from Chicago when he was in his 80s. My mother used to have to go and argue with the superintendent, the city superintendent, that he should have his job. And he was well able physically to still do it. And so that image was always in front of us. When I went back to school, I had all these grand ideas, and I thought rather important ideas about things that I would write my dissertation on. And they're good ideas, they're fine ideas. But when I went to school and started working with the people who would ultimately become my advisors, I started writing a couple of stories that I turned into a creative writing class. I have my doctorate is in English studies and creative writing. And so I turned these papers in on a class that we were taking at Hull House about Jane Addams and Ellen Gates Starr, the founders of the social service program there. And my professor looked at me after he turned back the stories and he said, you know, I know you have some good ideas for your dissertation. He says, but this is the one. He says, you're the one that has to write this story. Your father is entrusting you with this ambition, and so it has to be you. And why not make it your dissertation? Why not have it be part of who you are and what you are? So I thought, well, okay. I had to negotiate as part of the process the omerta, which does this code of silence that in many families, you talk about the good stuff, you don't talk so much about the bad. But I was able to work through that because after my mother passed away some 12 years ago now, my mother had been the primary the default, let me say, using current technology, the default storyteller in our family. And she was really good at it, and we all loved to hear her. And my father was often, would corroborate with her during a session, or she'd look to him for validation or authentication, but she had the narrative impulse. And so I didn't think of my father as a storyteller growing up. But after she passed away, he said very quietly to me one day, he says, I want to get some stories down. And I'll never forget that moment, and I never forget the way he said it. And I said, oh, okay, do you have some different thing? Yeah, I'm for it, yeah, let's do it. And so while my other siblings are saying, well, Dad, you can write this down yourself, you don't need Roxanne, just because they wanted him to, keep busy and do things. But he just looked at me and he said, I want to get some stories down. Now you have to understand, my father was hearing impaired from a childhood bout with diphtheria, which killed many children, over 700 in the year that he had it as a child, because many of the, many American, native-born Americans, but many immigrants were especially suspicious of vaccinations. And so they had developed a new vaccination, and it was, the newspaper reports that a lot of people, the health commissioner was actually going around door to door to try and talk people into letting their children be vaccinated. So over the years, because I'm his youngest child, I always fancied that he and I had a sort of special kind of communication system, because he could look at me, he knew how to read lips, and he could look at me, and when things got too noisy or too argumentative, he'd turn down the volume on his hearing aids, and he'd look at me like, craziness, and I'd look back, and we had this sort of communication. So he looked at me that day and said, again, I want to get some stories down. So we started this process, and I'm going to read to you now, and it became my dissertation, and there's a whole lengthy theoretical introduction that I won't, that satisfied my degree requirements, and my own need to focus on a theme. What was I trying to do here? To tell someone else's memoir is even more challenging, I found, than telling your own. And there's a certain responsibility you feel to maintain the fidelity of the person's narration, but at the same time, you can't help but interact, especially when it's someone as close as one of your parents. So I really struggled with that for a while, and finally, late in my research, I came across the work of another scholar, Irene Kakandes, who writes about her own father's experiences in the Greek, in Greece, harboring refugees from who would have otherwise been put in Jewish refugees who would have been put in the Nazi war camps, but her father never spoke of it, never. And so it was only at the end of his life that she was able to piece enough information together. She calls her work with him para-memoir, meaning to kind of be alongside. I think of myself as being in a little sidecar with my father, kind of he's driving and I'm trying to pay attention and maybe point out a road sign or two, but at the same time trying to follow where he's taking me. So I really let him tell me the stories he wanted to tell me, and what it turned into be is this very hybrid project. There's prose here, his own first-person prose of his experiences, that the ones he chose to share with me. There are poems, there are recipes, there are lots of pictures and maps and pictures of tickets and a shoebox and different things, awards, other ephemera that he had collected over the years and were important to him. And then there were my own third-person reflections, because I couldn't help but, I felt an obligation to try and make sense in my mind in terms of our contemporary context. What is it that I'm writing about? Because I felt his stories were so important and so related to our world, but I needed to explain to my audience why. And I think the issues that kept coming up over and over again were the notions of the American dream and how much it relates to all immigrant culture in a special way. We've certainly heard about a lot more about that in the last few years. Also in terms of assimilation, what does it mean to assimilate? Do we choose? Does it happen? When does it happen? And the notion of family family stories becoming part of a bigger patchwork of memories that really create our legacies, that create the things that we stand on, that we feel that our foundation is our foundation, and that we wrestle with, as I've heard so many of you say today or imply, you know, you're thinking about generations here. We're not just talking about this moment right now. We're talking about the ones who came before us, but we're looking ahead to the ones who are yet to come. So now for the amuse-bouche, or the little teasers, the culinary teasers, or the literary teasers, I hope that will, and I do hope you join us even if you don't decide. The contest for the Italian American Theater Association, or I'm sorry, the Italian American Theater of Chicago, I have to get it right. That contest will go on all year, and so please, you know, we'll try and make sure that through the Casa Italia we keep publicizing that and the deadlines. But even just to come and see Hull House, and Hull House is where my father actually grew up across the alley from Hull House and played on the Hull House playground, which was considered by many to be the first playground in Chicago. So that whole complex of buildings is no longer there. Two of them remain, the original home and then the dining hall. And that is, that's of 13 buildings that were once there. So now for the other. I was fairly surprised when my father told me in the late gray of an indifferent winter, not that long ago, that he wanted to share some of his own memories, his own stories. Even as he spoke, I knew immediately that I would take up the task of recording them for him. My mother, his darling Annie, had died unexpectedly earlier that fall, and he had become very quiet in his grief over the absence of a woman he had known most of his life, nearly 62 of those years as her husband. I hoped that the storytelling would ease some of the loneliness I could see on his face. I also wanted to distract him, and perhaps myself, from the belief that he was destined to die soon, following the legacy of his own grandparents, also named Rocco and Ann, who died within 2 weeks of each other. I wanted him to tell me his stories, because I hoped that if he kept on talking, he would keep on living, and I needed him to live. He had worked long and hard hours as I was growing up, and selfishly, I wanted more time with him. I thought his telling and my recording the stories he chose to share would be straightforward, linear at first, uncomplicated. But before long, I realized that many of his memories shared a common theme, playing against the backdrop of not just work, but what we have come to think about as the American dream. And in the perspective of that lens, there was more to consider, more to reflect on, at least for me. Although my father is a willing storyteller, he is much less interested in analyzing or reflecting on the past. Like many others of his generation, he'd worked hard in one way or another since he was a child, and many of his stories validate the rewards of that labor, but others hint at its costs. As a child, I thought he was a pragmatist, even though I didn't know what that word meant. You take advantage of what you know and what you have, and you put that to work for you and those around you. You take care of things. You do what you have to do. That was the model and the mandate that he and my mother set for us. But slowly, as he began to speak about his own